Hello everyone and welcome to the while loops lecture. So what we're going to be learning about in this lecture is how to use the while statement in Python, and it's actually one of the most general ways to perform iteration. And what happens is the while statement will repeatedly execute a single statement or a group of statements until a true value occurs. So you can see here, if we zoom in, that the general format for a while loop is you have while, then some sort of test condition, and then as long as that test condition hasn't been or is still being met, then you have whatever code is executed. And then if you want, you can have an else to have a final code statement. So what we're going to be doing throughout this lecture is just going through some of these examples. So you can see here I have the Jupyter Notebook open, and we're going to be going through these examples. And then we're also going to be learning about the terms break, continue, and pass. Then we're going to be working through some more examples there. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and check it out. So we're going to hop over to the Jupyter Notebook. So now we're at the Jupyter Notebook for the while loops. And let's go ahead and look at a few simple while loops in action. So I'm going to say make a variable called x equals 0. And then you'll notice the formatting looks pretty similar to a for loop, except we have a while statement. And I'm going to say while, notice the syntax highlighting, x is less than 10. And here we can say do some code. So if I just said right now print hello and clicked enter here, this loop would go on forever, right? Because nothing is affecting x, and x will always be less than 10 as long as x is 0. So I'm not going to actually run that. What I'm going to do is say, I'm going to say print x is currently space, and then I'm going to print the value of x. And then what I'm going to say is I'm going to add 1 to x for every instance in that loop. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So if you notice, while x was less than 10, I said, okay, well, print this statement, x is currently, and then we printed x. And then the next step was x add 1 to it. So after that, it became 1. And then was this statement still true? Yes, at 1 is still less than 10. So this while loop basically keeps performing until the condition is met. And in this case, once x was greater than or equal to 10, or basically no longer less than 10, this loop stopped. Okay, so hopefully that should be pretty clear. And notice how many times the print statements occurred and how the while loop kept going until that true condition was met, which occurred once that x equals 10. So you can see it actually stops at that 9, because once you had 10 there, none of this code executed. So it's important to note that that occurred and the code stopped. So let's go ahead and see how we could have added an else statement to this. So I'm going to make another cell here. I'm going to say x equals 0, and I'm going to say while, let's go ahead and just zoom in one more. I'm going to say while x is less than 10, print x is currently, comma x, and then I'm going to say go ahead and add that 1 to it, and now I'm going to have an else statement. So this is going to occur after the while statement condition is met. I'm going to say print all done. So let's go ahead and run that cell and see what happens. So you'll notice we have x equals 0, and after I met that condition on that while loop, I did my else statement and printed all is done, or all done. Okay, great. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward to you. Basically what we have is this while condition, and the while loop will just keep running until the condition is met. All right. So now we're going to learn about break, continue, and pass. So that's going to be the words, break, continue, and pass. So break, continue, pass. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over to the notebook so we can explore it a little further. So we can use break, continue, and pass statements in our loops to add additional functionality for various cases. And these three statements are defined by, first off, break. So what happens is break, if you put that in your loop, it's going to break out of the current closest and closing loop. What continue is going to do, if you type that in, it's going to go to the top of the closest and closing loop, and then pass does nothing at all. So when we're thinking about break and continue statements, the general format is going to look a little something like this. You can have a while test condition and then some code, and you can say maybe if another test condition, break, or if another test condition, continue, and then you have an else. So you'll notice the break and continue statements can appear anywhere inside the loop's body, but we will usually put them further nested in conjunction with an if statement to perform an action based on some sort of test condition. So to explain all that, we're going to go ahead and explore some more examples. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, we're going to start with that same example we've been working at. I'm going to say x equals 0, and then I'm going to say while x is less than 10, print x is currently space comma x, and then I'm going to add another print statement. I'm going to say x is still less than 10, adding 1 to x. And then I'm going to do that. I'm going to add 1 to x. So notice what's going on here. I'm saying while x is less than 10, print the current x, and then also print a statement that verifies or just tells you x is still less than 10, I'm adding 1 to x, and then I go ahead and add 1 to x. And now what I'm going to do is add an if statement here. And what this if statement is going to do is it's going to say if x is equal to 3, go ahead and print some sort of alert. So I'm going to say, hey, x equals 3. And then I'm going to go backspace to come back and line it up with that if, and I'm going to say else print continuing dot dot dot. And I'm going to say continue. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this down, what's going on in this cell. I'm saying while x is less than 10, print the statement, which is going to print out your current x. Then I'm going to say print x is still less than 10. Then I'm going to add 1 to x right here. And then I'm saying, okay, now if at that point in time, if x is equal to 3, print this statement. Else, if it's any other number that's not 3, go ahead and print continuing, and then we continue on with this outside loop. Okay, let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. So let's take a look at the output. I print out x is currently the number, x is still less than 10, adding 1, and then continuing. And if you notice, hey, x is currently 2, x is still less than 10, adding 1 to x. And at that point in time, I've added 1 to x, so it's going to say, hey, x equals 3. So you get that little alert there. And it's going to say, hey, x is currently 3, it's still less than 10, I'm adding 1, and at that point it's 4, so it's going to go ahead and continue going. All right, so you're going to have to note how we have that printed statement when x is equal to 3, and then the continue being printed as we continue through that outer while loop. So let's go ahead and put a break once x is equal to 3 so we can get a sense of how break works. So I'm going to go ahead and go back here, and I'm going to say, okay, put in a break statement. And remember what the break statement does is it's going to break that code for the outer loop. So now I'm going to run this cell. And if you notice, once that statement's true, so hey, x is equal to 3, print this, and then break. So it stops that outer loop that it's nested in. And then you have the hey equals 3, and it doesn't continue going because of that break. So note how the other else statement wasn't reached, and continuing afterwards was never printed. So these are pretty brief examples, but hopefully you have a comfortable understanding of this while statement and how to read and write it. Okay, so I want to make a quick word of caution. if you have something that is always true, you can run into danger of having an infinitely running loop. So if I were to say something like while true prints, let's say infinite, and I'm not going to actually run this cell, because if I ran this cell, I would just get an infinite print statements. And if you notice here in this Jupyter notebook, you'll notice it's actually a super long notebook because I've run a quick sample of infinite loop by always having that true. Okay, so make sure you do not do that in your code. Always, before you implement a while statement, make sure that there's at least some sort of break statement that you'll hit, or you're affecting the test condition where you won't have an infinite loop occur. Okay, so that's actually it for this lesson on while loops. So just to reiterate, the general format of a while loop, you have a while, some sort of test condition, and then your code statement. And then you can have an else for when you finish that while loop. You can have final code statements. So we went through a quick example using 10, and we kept adding to it. And then the next example, we had an else statement. And then after that example, we learned about break, continue, and pass. So quick reminder, break is going to break out of the current closest enclosing loop. Continue is going to go to the top of the closest enclosing loop, and then pass does nothing at all. All right, so we'll be revisiting while loops and then break and continue statements as we go on throughout the course. So don't worry, we'll be covering this more and more as we get more and more complicated programs throughout the course. Okay, so that's it for the while loop. I will see you at the next lecture.